I never imagined that installing a heated driveway system would turn into a full-blown war with my homeowners association. But here I was, standing in my garage in Madison, Wisconsin, watching Karen Pemberton's face turn the color of a ripe tomato as she demanded access to my personal property. Let me back up a bit. My name is William Thompson, and I'm a mechanical engineer who specializes in HVAC and radiant heating systems. I moved to the Riverside Meadows HOA community about 3 years ago, right after my divorce was finalized. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first, a collection of moderately upscale homes with well-maintained lawns and friendly neighbors. The HOA fees were reasonable at $200 a month, and the board seemed relatively hands-off. That should have been my first warning sign, because boards that seem uninvolved are often just waiting for the right moment to pounce. My property sat at the corner of Maple Drive and Birch Lane, which made it highly visible to anyone entering or leaving the subdivision. The house itself was a beautiful 2-story colonial with a massive driveway that could fit 4 cars easily. Wisconsin winters being what they are, I quickly realized that shoveling snow off that enormous expanse of concrete was going to be a nightmare. That's when I got the idea to install a hydronic heating system beneath the driveway. For those who don't know, a hydronic heated driveway works by circulating hot water or a glycol mixture through tubes installed beneath the surface. When it snows, the heat melts it automatically, leaving you with a clear, safe driveway without any manual labor required. It's an expensive system to install, but given my expertise and connections in the industry, I managed to get all the materials at cost and did most of the installation work myself over the course of a month. The system was a beauty. I used PEX tubing laid out in a serpentine pattern, connected to a dedicated boiler in my garage that I could control via a smartphone app. I even installed moisture and temperature sensors that would automatically activate the system when snow was detected. The whole setup cost me about $15,000, which was still cheaper than having a contractor do it, and it worked flawlessly through the first winter. That's when the trouble started. It was a Tuesday morning in January when I first noticed people slowing down as they drove past my house. At first, I thought maybe I had left my garage door open or something equally mundane. But then I started getting text messages from my neighbor Marcus, who lived 2 houses down. "Dude, people are losing their minds over your driveway," his message read. "Everyone's talking about it at the community Facebook page." I didn't even know we had a community Facebook page, which probably tells you how involved I was with neighborhood drama. But curiosity got the better of me, and I requested to join the group. What I found there was eye-opening. There were dozens of posts about my heated driveway, with people asking how I did it, how much it cost, and whether they could install their own systems. Most of the comments were positive, but there was one person who stood out like a sore thumb: Karen Pemberton. "This kind of ostentatious display is exactly what's wrong with our community," she had written. "We have standards here, and one person deciding to show off their wealth with unnecessary luxuries undermines the cohesive aesthetic we've worked so hard to maintain." I had seen Karen around the neighborhood before. She was in her early 50s, always dressed like she was about to attend a country club luncheon, with perfectly styled blonde hair that probably cost more to maintain than my monthly grocery bill. She drove a white Lexus SUV with vanity plates that read HOmeowner 1, and had a habit of walking her tiny dog at exactly 7 in the morning and 4 in the evening, using those times to survey the neighborhood for any violations of her personal standards. I didn't respond to her post. I figured it would blow over. After all, I hadn't violated any HOA rules. I had checked the covenants and bylaws thoroughly before starting the project, and there was nothing that prohibited modifications to driveways as long as they didn't change the external appearance. My driveway looked exactly the same as it had before, just without snow on it. But Karen wasn't the type to let things go. The following week, I received a formal letter from the HOA board requesting that I attend their next monthly meeting to discuss my unauthorized modification. The letter was signed by Karen, who I learned was the HOA president, along with two other board members, Richard Chen and Patricia Morrison. I showed up to the meeting on a Thursday evening at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that was primarily used for garage sales and the occasional book club meeting. The room was set up with a long table at the front where the board members sat, facing rows of plastic chairs where about 20 homeowners had gathered. Apparently, my heated driveway was the hot topic of the month. Karen called the meeting to order with the self-importance of someone presiding over a United Nations assembly. She ran through the standard agenda items, approving minutes from the previous meeting, and discussing the spring landscaping budget for the common areas. Then she got to what she clearly considered the main event. Item 7, she announced, adjusting her reading glasses. Unauthorized modifications at 847 Maple Drive. I raised my hand. Before we get into this, I'd like to clarify that I did review the HOA bylaws before installing my heated driveway system, and I didn't find anything that would prohibit it. Karen's smile was thin and cold. Mr. Thompson, the issue isn't whether you technically violated a specific written rule. The issue is that you made a major modification without seeking board approval first. We have a process for these things. The bylaws say that homeowners must seek approval for modifications that alter the external appearance of their property. I countered, pulling out my phone where I had saved a copy of the relevant documents. My driveway looks exactly the same. The modification is entirely subsurface. Richard Chen, a soft-spoken man in his 60s who worked as an accountant, cleared his throat. William has a point, Karen. I've reviewed the bylaws as well, and I don't see where he violated anything. Karen's face flushed. The spirit of the rule is that major modifications should be approved. We can't have people just doing whatever they want without oversight. But that's exactly what the bylaws allow, I said, trying to keep my voice level. If the board wants to require approval for subsurface modifications, that would need to be added to the bylaws through the proper amendment process, which requires a vote of the full membership. Several homeowners in the audience nodded in agreement. I could see that Karen was losing control of the narrative, and she didn't like it one bit. Fine, she said sharply. Then I'm proposing that we hold an emergency vote to amend the bylaws to require board approval for all major modifications, including those that don't change external appearance. Patricia Morrison, the third board member who had been silent up to that point, finally spoke up. Karen, I don't think we can do that retroactively. Even if we pass such an amendment, it wouldn't apply to William's driveway since it's already installed. Karen's jaw clenched. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she looked for another angle of attack. Then her expression changed, and a calculating look came into her eyes. Mr. Thompson, she said sweetly, which immediately put me on guard. Your heated driveway is quite impressive. Several residents have expressed interest in similar installations. Have you considered offering your services to install systems for other homeowners? I should have seen where this was going, but I was just relieved that she seemed to be backing down. I suppose I could help people out if they wanted. I have all the equipment and know-how. Wonderful, Karen said. In fact, I think it would be a great community improvement if we had heated driveways throughout the neighborhood. It would certainly help with safety during winter storms. Of course, we'd want to ensure consistency and quality control. Perhaps we could work out an arrangement where you install systems for interested homeowners, and in exchange, the HOA could provide some sort of compensation or fee reduction. Several homeowners perked up at this suggestion. I could see people mentally calculating whether they could afford such an installation, but something about Karen's tone bothered me. There was an undertone I couldn't quite place. "I'd be happy to provide consultations and recommendations," I said carefully. "But I'm not looking to start a side business. I have a full-time job at thermodynamics engineering." Of course," Karen said, waving her hand dismissively. "We wouldn't want to impose, but perhaps you could at least install a system for the common areas. We have that lovely brick pathway near the entrance that becomes treacherous in winter. A heating system there would benefit everyone." Now I saw where this was headed. Karen wanted me to donate my time and expertise for a community project. "That would be quite a bit more complex than a driveway," I explained. "The pathways have different thermal requirements, and the system would need to be properly integrated with the existing landscaping. We'd be looking at a cost of probably $30,000 to $40,000 for materials alone, plus hundreds of hours of labor." "But you said you got your materials at cost," Karen pressed. "And surely your time would be a donation to the community that benefits you as well." "I'm not donating $40,000 and 3 months of my free time," I said flatly. "If the HOA wants to install heated pathways, you'd need to hire a contractor and fund it through the regular budget process." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Karen's fake smile disappeared completely. "I see. So you're willing to enjoy the benefits of this community but not contribute back when asked." "I contribute my HOA dues every month like everyone else," I replied, feeling my own temper rising. "What you're asking for is completely unreasonable." The meeting deteriorated from there. Several homeowners spoke up in my defense, pointing out that Karen's request was indeed unreasonable. Others, primarily Karen's friends, suggested that I was being selfish. Eventually, the meeting was adjourned without any resolution, and I went home feeling frustrated and concerned about what Karen might try next. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 3 days later, I received another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that after careful review, the board had determined that my heated driveway system constituted a modification to the property's utility systems, which did require board approval under a different section of the bylaws. I was being fined $500 for the violation and ordered to either remove the system or seek retroactive approval, which would require paying a $1,000 application fee. I immediately called Richard Chen, whose personal number I had gotten from Marcus. He sounded embarrassed when he answered. "William, I'm sorry about this," he said. "Karen pushed this through via email vote. She claimed it was time-sensitive because we needed to establish precedent before other homeowners started installing similar systems. She's interpreting the utility modification clause in a way that I don't think was ever intended." "Can't you and Patricia outvote her?" I asked. "It's complicated," Richard sighed. "Patricia is intimidated by Karen. She's new to the board and doesn't want to rock the boat. And technically, Karen's interpretation isn't completely unreasonable, even if I disagree with it. If you want to fight this, you'd probably need to bring it to the full membership or take legal action." I hung up and immediately started researching Wisconsin HOA law. What I found was both encouraging and frustrating. On one hand, HOAs in Wisconsin have broad authority to create and enforce rules. On the other hand, those rules have to be reasonable and applied consistently. The problem was that fighting Karen would require either convincing enough homeowners to vote her out or filing a lawsuit, both of which would be time-consuming and expensive. I decided to try a different approach first. I drafted a detailed response to the board, citing the specific language in the utility modification clause and explaining why it didn't apply to my situation. The clause in question dealt with modifications to shared utilities like water lines, gas lines, and electrical systems that could impact other properties. My heated driveway was entirely self-contained and didn't connect to or affect any shared systems. I argued that applying this clause to my installation was an overreach and requested that the fine be rescinded. I submitted my response and waited. After 2 weeks with no reply, I sent a follow-up email. Still nothing. Then I tried calling Karen directly. She answered on the 4th ring. "Mrs. Pemberton, this is William Thompson. I'm calling about my response to the fine regarding my heated driveway." "Oh yes, Mr. Thompson." Her voice dripped with false sympathy. "The board reviewed your response and found it unpersuasive. The fine stands. You have 30 days from the original notice to comply, or additional fines will be assessed." "Can I at least come to another board meeting to discuss this?" I asked. "The board meetings are for board business, not for homeowners to argue about fines they've already been assessed. If you want to appeal, you'll need to submit a formal appeal in writing, along with a $250 appeal fee." "You're charging me to appeal a fine that I don't believe is valid in the first place. Those are the rules, Mr. Thompson. If you don't like them, perhaps you should consider living in a community without an HOA." She hung up before I could respond. I was furious, but I tried to think logically. Karen was clearly on a power trip, and she had singled me out for some reason. Maybe it was because I had publicly contradicted her at the meeting. Maybe she was genuinely offended by my refusal to donate my time and money. Or maybe she was just the kind of person who needed to assert dominance over others to feel important. Whatever her motivation, I needed to decide how to respond. I could pay the fines and apply for retroactive approval, which would cost me $1,750 total. I could refuse to pay and let the fines accumulate, which would eventually give the HOA grounds to file a lien against my property. Or I could fight back. I've never been the kind of person who backs down from bullies, and Karen Pemberton was a bully with a title and a little bit of authority that had gone to her head. So I started planning. First, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I requested copies of all HOA documents, including the original covenants, all amendments, meeting minutes for the past 5 years, and the HOA's financial records. Under Wisconsin law, homeowners have a right to access these documents. Karen tried to delay, claiming she needed to compile everything, but I pressed the issue and eventually received a massive stack of papers and PDFs. What I found was illuminating. Karen had been HOA president for 4 years, and during that time, she had steadily expanded the board's authority through selective interpretation of vague bylaws. She had fined dozens of homeowners for trivial violations, everything from holiday decorations staying up too long to grass being a 1/4 inch too tall. Most people had just paid the fines rather than fight. The HOA's bank account had swelled considerably, but very little of that money had been spent on actual community improvements. More interesting was what I found in the meeting minutes. About 2 years ago, there had been a proposal to install heated pathways near the community entrance, exactly what Karen had asked me to do for free. The project had been shelved because the contractor bids had come in too high, around $75,000. Karen had been furious, according to the minutes, and had accused the board of being penny wise and pound foolish. Suddenly, her interest in my heated driveway made perfect sense. She didn't actually care about the system itself. She saw me as a resource she could exploit to get her pet project done without having to spend the HOA's money. When I refused, she decided to punish me. Armed with this information, I started reaching out to other homeowners. Marcus was immediately on board, having dealt with Karen's nonsense himself when she tried to fine him for parking his work truck in his driveway. Through Marcus, I met several other frustrated residents, including a woman named Grace Sullivan who lived on Oak Circle. Grace was a lawyer, though her specialty was family law rather than HOA disputes. Still, she understood the legal landscape better than I did and was happy to offer advice. We met at a local coffee shop, a cozy place called The Grind that served excellent lattes and homemade pastries. "The problem with fighting an HOA is that they're using your money to fight you," Grace explained, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Every dollar they spend on legal fees comes from the HOA budget, which is funded by your dues. So in a sense, you're paying to be sued." "That's insane," I muttered. "It's how the system works," she said with a shrug. "But there are ways to fight back. The most effective is to change the board. Karen's term is up for election in 6 months. If you can get enough homeowners mobilized, you could run a slate of candidates and vote her out." 6 months is a long time, I said. "And in the meantime, she's going to keep escalating." "Probably," Grace agreed. "But if you can document everything she does, every petty fine and vindictive action, it'll help convince people that she needs to go." Right now, a lot of homeowners don't pay attention to HOA politics because it doesn't affect them directly. You need to make it affect them. Over the next few weeks, I followed Grace's advice. I created a simple website documenting Karen's history of fines and heavy-handed enforcement. I didn't make it personal or attack her character. I just presented the facts, the amount of money collected in fines, the lack of spending on community improvements, and the pattern of selective enforcement. I shared the link in the community Facebook group, and it spread quickly. Karen's response was swift and predictable. She sent out an email to all homeowners claiming that I was spreading misinformation and defaming the board. She threatened legal action if I didn't take down the website. I responded by posting screenshots of the original HOA documents that supported everything I had written, along with a polite note suggesting that if she believed anything on the site was inaccurate, she should point out the specific errors. She didn't respond to that challenge, but the harassment intensified. I started getting violation notices for the most ridiculous things. My garbage cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection. My mailbox was faded and needed repainting. The wreath on my front door wasn't in keeping with community standards. Each violation came with a $50 to $100 fine. I documented everything, took photos, and added it all to the website. I also started fighting back on each fine, submitting appeals with my $250 fees, knowing that this was tying up Karen's time and forcing her to justify her actions in writing. Several other homeowners who had been fined started doing the same thing, and the board was suddenly drowning in appeals and paperwork. Then Karen made a critical mistake. It was mid-March, and the snow was starting to melt. My heated driveway had performed flawlessly all winter, and I had enjoyed the luxury of never having to shovel once. I came home from work one afternoon to find Karen standing in my driveway with 2 men I didn't recognize. One was holding a clipboard and the other had a camera. "Can I help you?" I asked, getting out of my car. "Mr. Thompson, Karen said in her most officious voice. "This is Daniel Webster from Webster Construction and his associate. They're here to provide an assessment of your heated driveway system for the HOA's records." "You can't just come onto my property without permission," I said, my anger rising. "The HOA covenants grant the board access to all properties for the purpose of inspections and assessments," Karen said smugly. "It's in Section 12, subsection 4. I knew the section she was referring to, but she was misinterpreting it again. That provision allowed for inspections of common areas and shared systems, not private installations on private property. But I decided to let her dig her hole deeper. "Fine," I said. "But I'm staying right here to supervise." Karen's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded to the contractor. He walked around my driveway, taking measurements and photos. I watched carefully, making sure he didn't damage anything. After about 15 minutes, he handed Karen some papers and left with his associate. "Thank you for your cooperation," Karen said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The board will review this assessment and determine the appropriate next steps." After she left, I immediately checked my security cameras. I had installed them a few weeks earlier, anticipating that Karen might try something. Sure enough, the footage showed Karen and the contractors arriving 15 minutes before I got home. They had walked around my entire property, not just the driveway, peering into windows and taking photos of everything. Karen had even tried my side gate to see if it was unlocked. I downloaded the footage and added it to my website with a detailed explanation of how Karen had violated my privacy and exceeded her authority. The response from the community was immediate and overwhelmingly negative toward Karen. Even some of her supporters started questioning whether she had gone too far. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. It demanded that I remove all defamatory and misleading information from my website and cease my harassment campaign against Karen Pemberton. The letter threatened legal action if I didn't comply within 7 days. I called Grace immediately. She reviewed the letter and laughed. "This is just an intimidation tactic," she said. "Nothing you've posted is defamatory because it's all true and documented. They're hoping you'll get scared and back down, but if they actually sue you, they'll have to prove their claims in court, and they can't." "So I should ignore it?" I asked. "Not exactly," Grace said thoughtfully. "You should respond, but don't give them what they want. Have a lawyer write a response explaining that you've posted only factual information and that you have no intention of removing it. That'll make it clear you're not intimidated. I can refer you to someone who handles this kind of thing." Grace connected me with Stuart Martinez, an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes and property law. Stuart was in his 40s, with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much petness in his career. We met at his office in downtown Madison, a modest space with law books lining the walls and a view of the state capitol building. "I've seen cases like this before," Stuart said after reviewing my documentation. "The HOA president gets drunk on power, starts overreaching, and eventually does something so egregious that it opens the door for legal action. You've got a strong case here, especially with the trespassing caught on camera. But here's what I'd recommend. Let me send a response to their attorney explaining that you've violated no laws and committed no defamation. We'll also point out that their client's actions constitute harassment and potential trespassing. That might make them back off." "And if it doesn't?" I asked. "Then we consider filing a lawsuit against the HOA and Karen Pemberton personally for harassment and abuse of authority. It's a bigger step, but given the documentation you have, I think we'd win. The question is whether you want to escalate to that level." I thought about it carefully. A lawsuit would be expensive, time-consuming, and stressful. But Karen had made it clear she wasn't going to stop until she had completely broken me or driven me out of the neighborhood. If I didn't stand up now, she'd just keep coming. Let's send the response letter first and see how they react, I decided. But I want to be ready to file suit if necessary. Stewart drafted a strongly worded letter that laid out all of Karen's violations and made it clear that I was prepared to defend myself vigorously. He sent it via certified mail to the HOA's attorney, and we waited. The response came faster than I expected. 3 days later, Stewart called me with an update. Their attorney wants to set up a mediation, he said. That's actually a good sign. It means they're worried about going to court. I think they've realized that Karen has put them in a bad position. We agreed to the mediation, which was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I continued my campaign to change the board. I had recruited 3 other homeowners to run for the board positions that were up for election, including Marcus and Grace. We created flyers outlining our platform, mostly focused on transparency, reasonable enforcement, and actually spending HOA money on community improvements rather than building up a war chest for Karen's legal battles. The mediation was held at a neutral location, a conference room in an office building near the courthouse. Present were myself, Stewart, Karen, Patricia Morrison, Richard Chen, and the HOA's attorney, a stiff man in his 60s named Gerald Hofstetter. A professional mediator, a woman named Dr. Rebecca Walsh, facilitated the discussion. Dr. Walsh opened by explaining the mediation process and emphasizing that everything discussed would be confidential unless we reached an agreement. Then she asked each side to present their perspective on the dispute. Stewart went first, calmly laying out the timeline of events, from my installation of the heated driveway through Karen's escalating harassment. He presented the documentation showing that I had violated no rules, that the fines were unjustified, and that Karen had exceeded her authority multiple times. He also showed the security camera footage of Karen and the contractors trespassing on my property. Karen's face grew redder as Stewart spoke. When it was her turn, she launched into a long defense of her actions, claiming that she was just trying to maintain order and standards in the community. She insisted that my website was defamatory and that I had orchestrated a harassment campaign against her. Gerald, the HOA's attorney, looked increasingly uncomfortable as Karen spoke. Finally, he gently interrupted her. Mrs. Pemberton, perhaps we should focus on finding a resolution rather than rehashing the past, he suggested. Dr. Walsh nodded. Let's talk about what each side wants to see happen. I want all fines against me rescinded, I said immediately. I want a written acknowledgement that my heated driveway system does not violate any HOA rules, and I want assurance that there will be no further retaliation against me. That's completely unacceptable, Karen snapped. He violated the rules and needs to be held accountable. Richard Chen, who had been quiet up to this point, finally spoke up. Karen, I don't think we can justify the fines. William is right that his installation doesn't violate the bylaws, and the website, while unflattering to you, isn't defamatory. He's just posting facts. Are you siding with him? Karen's voice rose. After everything I've done for this community, I'm trying to be objective, Richard said calmly. And objectively, we're in the wrong here. If we go to court, we're going to lose, and it's going to cost the HOA a lot of money in legal fees. Patricia Morrison nodded hesitantly. I have to agree with Richard. I think we should consider William's proposal. Karen looked like she was about to explode. This is a betrayal. If you two won't support me, then maybe I should just resign. That might be for the best, Richard said quietly. There was a long, tense silence. Gerald leaned over and whispered something to Karen. Her expression went through several rapid changes, from rage to shock to something that might have been fear. Finally, she seemed to deflate. "Fine," she said bitterly. "If that's how you feel, then fine. Rescind his fines. Let him do whatever he wants. I don't care anymore." Dr. Walsh sensed an opening. "So, are we in agreement that the HOA will rescind all fines against Mr. Thompson and acknowledge that his heated driveway installation was within the rules?" Richard nodded. Patricia nodded. Karen just stared at the table. "We'll need to get this in writing," Stewart said. "And I'd like to add one more provision. The HOA agrees not to institute any new rules regarding heated driveways or similar systems without proper notice and a vote of the full membership." Gerald consulted briefly with Richard and Patricia, then nodded. "We can agree to that." The mediation ended with an agreement drafted and signed by all parties. I had won, at least in the immediate sense. All my fines were rescinded, and I received a written acknowledgement that my driveway was compliant with all HOA rules. More importantly, the mediation had exposed the cracks in Karen's support on the board. Both Richard and Patricia had publicly sided against her. But I knew this wasn't really over. Karen might have backed down at the mediation, but she wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. And I was right. About a week after the mediation, I started hearing from other homeowners that Karen was campaigning hard for the upcoming board elections. She was going door to door, telling people that I had bullied her and that the other board members had betrayed the community by siding with me. She was painting herself as the victim and me as the villain. I didn't engage directly with her campaign. Instead, I focused on getting out the vote for my slate of candidates. We held an informal meet and greet at Marcus's house, inviting anyone who wanted to come and hear about our plans for the HOA. About 40 homeowners showed up, which was impressive for a community of 200 homes. Grace, Marcus, and the other candidates spoke about their vision for a more transparent, reasonable HOA. I talked about my experience and how it had shown me that the current system wasn't working. Several other homeowners shared their own stories of dealing with Karen's heavy-handed enforcement. The elections were held at the annual meeting in early May. It was a beautiful spring evening, and the community center was packed with homeowners. Karen stood at the front, looking immaculate in a navy blue suit, and called the meeting to order. The first part of the meeting was the usual business, approving budgets and discussing maintenance issues. Then we got to the elections. There were 3 board positions up for election. Karen was running for re-election as president, along with her 2 allies, Brenda Foster and Timothy Crane. Our slate consisted of Grace, Marcus, and a retired teacher named Dorothy Wagner. Each candidate was given 5 minutes to speak. Karen went first, delivering a passionate speech about her years of service and dedication to the community. She painted a picture of herself as a tireless advocate who had maintained property values and standards despite constant opposition from residents who wanted to turn the neighborhood into a free-for-all. When it was Grace's turn, she was calm and measured. She acknowledged that Karen had worked hard but suggested that it was time for a change in approach. She talked about the importance of enforcing rules fairly and consistently, spending HOA money wisely, and treating all homeowners with respect. Marcus spoke about his experience as a small business owner and how he could bring financial oversight to the board. Dorothy talked about her years as an educator and how she believed in fostering community rather than controlling it. Then came the vote. Every homeowner in good standing was entitled to vote, either in person or by proxy. The ballots were distributed, marked, and collected. While they were being counted, the meeting moved on to other business. The tension in the room was palpable. Finally, after about 30 minutes, the election committee chair, a neutral homeowner named Frank Gibson, announced the results. For the first board position, he said, Grace Sullivan received 112 votes. Karen Pemberton received 68 votes. A wave of surprise rippled through the room. Karen's face went completely white. For the second position, Marcus Brennan received 108 votes. Brenda Foster received 72 votes. And for the third position, Dorothy Wagner received 105 votes. Timothy Crane received 75 votes. It was a clean sweep. Karen and her allies had lost every single seat. The room erupted in a mixture of applause and shocked murmuring. Karen stood frozen at the front of the room for a moment, then gathered her things and walked out without a word. Several of her friends followed her, but most people stayed. Grace, Marcus, and Dorothy were immediately sworn in as the new board members. The first order of business was electing officers. Grace was voted in as president, Marcus as treasurer, and Dorothy as secretary. Richard Chen, who still had a year left on his term, would serve as the fourth board member. As I walked out of the community center that night, I felt a tremendous sense of relief. The battle was over and we had won. Karen's reign of petty tyranny was finished, or so I thought. About a week after the election, I came home from work to find a note taped to my front door. It was handwritten in neat, angry letters. "You haven't won. You've just made everything worse. Watch your back." It wasn't signed, but I recognized Karen's handwriting from various HOA notices I had received over the months. I took a photo of the note and filed it away, not sure if it was just an empty threat or something more serious. A few days later, I noticed that someone had driven over my lawn, leaving deep tire tracks in the grass. My security cameras had been mysteriously unplugged the night before, so I had no footage of who did it. Then my mailbox was knocked over. Then someone poured motor oil all over my driveway, right over the heated system. I reported each incident to the police, but there was little they could do without evidence. I installed additional security cameras with battery backups and positioned them to cover every angle of my property. I also started parking my car in the garage rather than in the driveway. The harassment continued for several weeks. Someone egged my house. Someone spray painted a rude message on my garage door. Someone even let the air out of all 4 of my car tires one night. Every time my cameras were either blocked, disabled, or the perpetrator was smart enough to avoid being caught on film. I knew it was Karen, but I couldn't prove it. I shared my suspicions with Grace and Marcus, who agreed that it was likely her but cautioned that we needed evidence before making accusations. Then one night in early June, I got the evidence I needed. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, when I heard a noise outside. It sounded like someone was in my backyard. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security camera app. Sure enough, there was a figure moving around near my garage, dressed in dark clothing and wearing a hoodie. I immediately called 911, then watched on my phone as the figure approached my garage door with what looked like a gas can. My heart started racing as I realized what was about to happen. The figure started pouring liquid around the base of the garage door. I could hear sirens in the distance. The figure heard them too and dropped the gas can, running toward the back fence. But I had a camera positioned there as well, and as the person climbed over the fence, the hoodie fell back, revealing Karen Pemberton's face clearly illuminated by my motion sensor light. I ran downstairs and outside just as a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers jumped out and I quickly explained what was happening. One of them ran around to the back while the other stayed with me. We could hear shouting from the backyard, and then the officer emerged with Karen in handcuffs, Her face was a mask of rage and desperation. "He ruined everything," she screamed as the officer led her to the police car. "He destroyed this community. Someone had to stop him." The second officer examined the gas can and the liquid poured around my garage. "Gasoline," he confirmed grimly. "Looks like she was planning to burn your garage down." I felt cold all over. This had gone way beyond petty harassment. Karen had actually tried to commit arson. If I hadn't been awake, if the police hadn't arrived so quickly, my entire garage and possibly my house could have burned down. The police took my statement and downloaded the security camera footage. They also took the gas can and other evidence. Karen was transported to the Dane County Jail, where she was booked on charges of attempted arson, trespassing, and vandalism related to all the previous incidents I had reported. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone knew what had happened. There was shock, disbelief, and for some of Karen's former supporters, shame at having defended her for so long. The legal process moved forward steadily. Karen's attorney tried to get her released on bail, but the prosecutor argued that she was a danger to me specifically and the community in general. The judge agreed and set a high bail that Karen apparently couldn't make. She remained in jail awaiting trial. As more details emerged during the pre-trial proceedings, we learned that Karen had been struggling financially for years. Her husband had left her 2 years earlier, and she had been living well beyond her means to maintain appearances. The HOA position had given her a sense of power and control at a time when her personal life was falling apart. When I challenged that control, she had spiraled into an obsessive need to punish me. It was almost sad in a way, but I couldn't bring myself to feel much sympathy. She had tried to burn down my house. She had terrorized me for months. Whatever personal problems she had didn't excuse her actions. The trial took place in August. I testified about the entire history of the conflict, from the initial installation of the heated driveway through all of Karen's escalating actions. The security camera footage was played in court, showing clearly that it was Karen attempting to set fire to my garage. Karen's attorney tried to argue that she had been under extreme emotional distress and wasn't thinking clearly. The prosecutor countered that the harassment had been ongoing for months, showing a pattern of deliberate, calculated behavior rather than a momentary lapse in judgment. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all counts. Karen was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. She was also ordered to pay restitution for all the damage she had caused to my property and to undergo psychiatric evaluation and treatment. As the bailiff led her away, Karen looked at me one last time. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, just emptiness. I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief that it was finally over, but also a lingering sadness at how badly things had deteriorated. Life in Riverside Meadows slowly returned to normal after that. Under Grace's leadership, the HOA became much more reasonable and focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. We used some of the accumulated funds to renovate the community center and add new playground equipment to the park. Several other homeowners even installed heated driveway systems, and I was happy to provide advice and recommendations, though I never did end up installing any systems myself. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen had been so opposed to my heated driveway that she had launched a crusade against it. And in the end, the neighborhood had embraced the technology she had tried to suppress. About a year after the trial, I was out working in my yard when a car pulled up. A woman I didn't recognize got out and walked over hesitantly. "Are you William Thompson?" she asked. I am, I replied cautiously. I'm Jennifer Pemberton, Karen's daughter, she said. I wanted to apologize for what my mother did to you. I know an apology doesn't undo the damage or the fear she caused, but I wanted you to know that not everyone in my family is like her. I didn't know what to say. Finally, I managed, "Thank you, that means something. How is she doing?" Jennifer sighed. "She's getting help finally. The psychiatric treatment in prison has actually been good for her. She's been diagnosed with some personality disorders and is on medication now. She's starting to understand how badly she lost control." "I'm glad she's getting help," I said, and I meant it. "She asked me to tell you that she's sorry," Jennifer continued. "She's not allowed to contact you directly because of the restraining order, but she wanted you to know. She understands if you can't forgive her." I thought about that for a moment. Forgiveness was a big word. What Karen had done was serious, and the trauma of those months hadn't completely faded. But holding on to anger wasn't helping me either. "Tell her I appreciate the apology," I said finally, "and I hope she continues to get better." Jennifer nodded, tears in her eyes, and thanked me before leaving. That conversation gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Karen had been a person, not just a villain, and she had been struggling with things I couldn't fully understand. That didn't excuse her actions, but it added context that made the whole situation feel less black and white. As for me, I continued to live in Riverside Meadows, enjoying my heated driveway every winter and participating actively in the HOA now that it was run by reasonable people. I even started dating someone I met at a community barbecue, a teacher named Rachel who thought the whole heated driveway saga was hilarious and admired how I had stood up for myself. The website I had created documenting the conflict became something of a resource for other homeowners dealing with difficult HOAs. I received emails from people all over the country asking for advice, and I was always happy to share what I had learned. Document everything, know your rights, build community support, and don't be afraid to stand up to bullies, even when they have titles and authority. Looking back on the whole experience, I could see how a simple home improvement project had spiraled into a full-blown war over control, respect, and power. It had been exhausting and frightening at times, but it had also taught me important lessons about community, persistence, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Every time I looked out at my snow-free driveway on a winter morning, I remembered what it had cost to install that system, not just in terms of money, but in terms of stress and conflict. But I also remembered that I had refused to back down, refused to let someone else's unreasonable demands dictate my choices. And that felt good. The heated driveway still works perfectly, melting snow with quiet efficiency every time winter storms roll through Madison. My neighbors no longer see it as a symbol of showing off or as a threat to community standards. It's just a nice feature that one homeowner installed, and several others have too. It's practical, efficient, and makes life a little bit easier during Wisconsin's harsh winters. And every winter, when I wake up to find my driveway clear while others are out shoveling, I think about Karen and hope that she's found some peace wherever she is. I also think about how grateful I am that I stood my ground, not just for myself, but for everyone else in the community who had been pushed around by someone who confused authority with power and control with leadership. The Riverside Meadows HOA is now a model of reasonable governance. Grace served 2 terms as president before handing over the position to Dorothy. Marcus remains treasurer and has implemented transparent financial reporting that every homeowner can access online. We have regular community events, reasonable enforcement of actual important rules, and a general sense that we're all in this together rather than being subjects under a petty tyrant's rule. Sometimes I think about that first meeting where Karen demanded I install heated systems for the community for free. If she had just asked nicely, if she had approached it as a request rather than a demand, I might have considered doing some work at a reduced rate or helping to coordinate a bulk installation discount with my suppliers. But her approach, her assumption that she could bully me into compliance, had poisoned any possibility of cooperation. That's the thing about power that people like Karen never seem to understand. Real authority comes from respect and trust, not from threats and punishment. The moment she started trying to force her will on me through fines and harassment, she lost any moral authority she might have had. And when she escalated to vandalism and ultimately attempted arson, she lost everything: her position, her freedom, and her reputation. I've been asked many times if I regret moving to an HOA community. The honest answer is no. The experience, as difficult as it was, taught me valuable lessons and ultimately led to positive changes in the neighborhood. Plus, I genuinely like most of my neighbors, and the community amenities are nice. The key is having reasonable people in charge, people who understand that an HOA exists to serve the homeowners, not to rule over them. My heated driveway continues to be a conversation starter. New neighbors moving in often ask about it, and I'm always happy to explain how it works and provide references for contractors who can install similar systems. Some people think it's an extravagance, others think it's brilliant, but nobody thinks it's a problem anymore. The security cameras I installed during the conflict remain active, not because I'm particularly paranoid now, but because they provide peace of mind. I've caught a few package thieves over the years and helped neighbors identify who hit their parked cars. Technology that I installed out of necessity has become a useful tool for the whole community. Stuart Martinez, my attorney, occasionally refers other homeowners to me when they're dealing with HOA disputes. I'm always willing to share my experience and the lessons I learned. The most important advice I give is to try to resolve things reasonably first. But if you're dealing with someone who's unreasonable, don't be afraid to stand your ground and fight back with documentation, community support, and legal action if necessary. The whole situation also gave me a deeper appreciation for the legal system. Yes, it's slow and expensive, but it ultimately worked the way it was supposed to. Karen's abuse of power was checked, her dangerous escalation was stopped, and justice was served. The system isn't perfect, but it's better than the alternative of might making right. As I write this, sitting in my home office looking out at my driveway, I can see the first snowflakes of another winter starting to fall. Soon my system will kick on automatically, warming the concrete and melting the snow as it lands. It's a small luxury, but one I earned through hard work, both in installing the system and in defending my right to have it. Karen Pemberton tried to take that away from me, not because it actually harmed anyone, but because she needed to assert control. In doing so, she lost everything that mattered to her. There's a lesson in that for anyone who finds themselves in a position of authority. Use it wisely, treat people with respect, and remember that power without restraint inevitably leads to destruction, usually self-destruction. I hope that, wherever Karen is now, whether still serving her sentence or released on parole, she's learned that lesson. I hope she's found healthier ways to deal with her need for control and validation. But mostly, I hope she's found peace, because anger and resentment that she carried, that need to dominate and punish, must have been exhausting to live with. For my part, I've moved on completely. The conflict feels like it happened in another lifetime, though it's only been a few years. I'm happy in my home, involved in my community, and grateful for the heated driveway that started this whole adventure. Every winter morning when I don't have to shovel snow, I think about how worth it the whole fight was. And if I'm being completely honest, there's a small part of me that takes satisfaction in knowing that my heated driveway outlasted Karen's presidency, her freedom, and her attempt to control something that was never hers to control. Sometimes standing up to bullies means you have to go through hell, but coming out the other side makes you stronger and proves that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, is always worth it in the end. The heated driveway hums quietly beneath the falling snow, doing exactly what it was designed to do, making my life a little easier and a little more comfortable. And that's really all I ever wanted, to make an improvement to my own property that benefited me. The fact that it became a symbol of resistance against petty tyranny was never my intention, but I'm proud of how I handled it nonetheless. Life in Riverside Meadows continues peacefully, with reasonable people making reasonable decisions for the good of the community. My heated driveway continues to work perfectly, and I continue to enjoy the simple pleasure of never having to shovel snow. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and refusing to let anyone take away what you've rightfully earned. And sometimes, just sometimes, standing up to a bully not only protects you but creates positive change for everyone around you. That's the real legacy of my conflict with Karen Pemberton, not the dramatic trial or the attempted arson, but the lasting improvement to how our community governs itself. And that's something worth far more than any heated driveway, though I'm certainly keeping mine too.